The Big 12 Mojo Rankings, my version of Power Rankings on the Big 12 Conference. And, man, getting down to the nitty-gritty here, I think there's some clear separation at the top. There's some clear bottom teams, and there's just a muddle of teams in the middle as we will get to. But let's go ahead and jump right into this week's rankings, and we'll start off as we typically do with 16 through 13, and that bottom four, they remain relatively unchanged. I mean, Oklahoma State basically in a perma spot at this point, and there's been no reason to move them from number 16 so far. If they jumped up and got themselves a win, that would be something that we would definitely celebrate and talk quite a bit about on this show, man. We'd make the Oklahoma State hour at this point for their sakes, because we know it's been a very tough year to have to deal with basically from the outset, but didn't play last week, so there's no reason to change them, and nobody was so horrid as to warrant jumping all the way down to 16. So Oklahoma State, they are where they are. Colorado, they stay where they are as well after the loss to West Virginia. I did think Julian Lewis played an impressive and nice game for a true freshman making his first start, playing a West Virginia defense that's very good in some ways. That was a challenge for him. And on the road in Morgantown, there was a lot on his plate. But I thought Julian Lewis actually played a pretty damn good game, and it was promising. And that future, I'm not sold on Deion being there for the long term, but I do think Julian Lewis is the type of guy that can keep him hanging around Boulder. I do think that that young man, along with some of the other players that they have assembled here over the last year or two, would be reasons for Deion to, in fact, stick around and see this thing through post Shedeur and Travis just 1 year later, but into the second, third, fourth years. But, you lose to West Virginia, you're not moving much. And then UCF, very disappointing loss, first ever space game loss there in Orlando, falling to Houston, and had a chance, had the lead there heading into the fourth quarter and couldn't hang on to it. Houston, with their incredible field goal kicker, able to get another victory, number 8 for them, as we'll get to, which no matter if you thought Houston was going to improve, I don't think you saw 8-2 in the cards necessarily for them. But UCF now at 4-5, they've got their work cut out for them to even make a bowl game at this point. And I didn't get to touch on this, but very briefly, because we just sort of went through the Big 12 results on Monday. But that Scott Frost decision there at the very end to change quarterbacks because Taven Jackson was dinged up. He was not playing well, and most of all, he was not healthy. They decide to give the ball to Davy Belfort, or Davy, I'm trying to remember which was, but they give the ball to Belfort, just come off the bench and try to go win us the game, and he drives him all the way down the field and gives them a chance, and he throws a pick. Mm-hmm. He throws a pick on his one and only pass attempt. So he was 0 for 1 with a interception. However, he also had 36 yards rushing, so he was able to move the ball a little bit, but Houston got the big defensive stop. So UCF now looking at a situation where a bowl game is going to be really tough to come by because they need 2 wins. They have 3 games remaining. Do you see 2 wins in these 3 games? At Texas Tech.
No.
Oklahoma State at home.
Yep.
At BYU.
Probably not.
Yeah. So probably 2 of the worst draws you could possibly have if you're trying to win 2 games in your last 3 would be at Tech and at BYU. And that's unfortunately for them what they've got sandwiched around with the trip to Lubbock coming up this weekend, that game against Oklahoma State. And then Kansas, I'm dropping a couple spots. I mean, you heard Ari Timken. I asked him a question. He talked for 20 minutes about the woes of Kansas football right now. And I'm there's a little bit of hyperbole there, obviously, but I clearly touched a nerve, I think you could say. And there's clearly nerves being hit over the weekend with Lance Leipold and his conservatism with trying to hold on to a lead and try to play the safe game rather than just going and winning the game. It has cost them time and time again, and it cost them once again this past weekend against Arizona on the road. So they have lost 3 out of their last 4, and you know what the one win is?
Oklahoma State.
It's Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
So you are an Oklahoma State away from being on a 4-game losing streak right now. So for that reason, I had to drop Kansas a couple of spots. So there's my bottom 4.
Yeah, Kansas.
And they have Iowa State and Utah.
I never thought I would be at a point.
That's another where they make a bowl game at Iowa State and then Utah at home. I think they got to win this weekend.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd watch as much Kansas football as I have this season, because now Amanda, they were supposed to be good, and she met Lance Leipold, and he was very sweet to her. So we've watched a lot of Kansas football this year, as we haven't so much in the past, and it's gut-wrenching, because you look at Mizzou, you look at Cincinnati, this last week, so many games they've had this year where you can win the game, but you have to keep doing what you were doing when you got the lead. They stop doing what they do when they have a lead, and it doesn't make any sense.
They also were blown out by Tech and K-State back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, but they are on a bit of a losing skid right now, save for that Oklahoma State game. 3 out of their last 4, and another game that you lose at the end that you had an opportunity to win. So on to the next batch of games. You got West Virginia up a spot after their win against Colorado. West Virginia now a couple of wins back-to-back. They got a good defense. They beat Houston in Houston, and they've got now this win over Colorado at home. That was a tight game, but I think the thing about West Virginia is, like, you could maybe say Kansas is a better team, right? And they lost to Kansas by 31 points about 2 months ago. But that was 2 months ago. And I think West Virginia has improved. I think that defense has got some legit spots on it. I think anybody who's played them would tell you that as well. I think they've got something with little Scotty Fox. I think there's a future there for him. And you got to remember, too, they were decimated by injuries to their skill guys in the preseason early on. So I've been impressed with West Virginia. I mean, they were on a long skid of losing, and they were right there like 15 for the longest. But you've got back-to-back wins now. So as far as mojo goes, I think the tide's starting to turn. I think Rich Rod's starting to turn this thing a little bit. Like, I think you can see where, like, they're playing really physical. They're playing hard. They're not out of it by any stretch. And so for that reason, I bumped them up a spot. K-State is dropping down a spot. There are still a lot of questions looming around them and the future and Chris Kleiman and just kind of where everything sits right now and what the future looks like. And there's a lot of talk about Gene Taylor and how long he is for the job at this point, kind of his attitude towards his constituents. And I think there's big picture concerns with them right now.
He's worn out with college athletics.
Yes, he is.
He's not the only one, but he's been vocal about it too.
Yes, I think he is very much worn down, and I think that you can kind of feel that. You can feel it from Kleiman. It's just not what you thought. Now, they got beat by 23 at home against Texas Tech the last time we saw them. They get Oklahoma State on the road this weekend, but I do drop them a spot because I just don't think, as far as mojo, there's a lot going on in Manhattan right now.
And I tell you what, K-State and KU fans, I know KU never beats K-State in football, but, God, they have both been a big disappointment. There's a lot of this group here in TCU, and I know but they have been a big disappointment.
Yes, they have. And they dropped the spot because of somebody jumping over them, which we will get to. Up next, you got Baylor. Now, they didn't play last week. Neither did Kansas State. So I wasn't going to move them, but it was somebody that was behind them that's now making a big jump because of just the way the conference is set up. It's hard to kind of sort through some of it. But Baylor, I mean, basically for the most part, sort of staying in the same vicinity where they were. But again, one team jumped over a bunch of them, so they just naturally went down. It was nothing other than that. They're a 9-10 team, and that's where they are on here. Same thing with Kansas State. And then TCU, the loss to Iowa State at home. TCU is just a really disappointing team to me. They're sort of all over the place. They're hard to peg any given week. And they were on a couple of game win streak where they'd gone to Morgantown and won. They'd beaten Baylor with the come from behind, like the late game win there. But then you turn around, you just fall on your face against Iowa State in a game that you should have been able to close out, and you didn't close it out. And there's no juice with Sonny Dykes in them right now. They're just sort of there, and they're not the only ones in this league that feel that way, but they're 6-3. They're above Baylor as far as like the head-to-head and the standings and Kansas State and things like that, but I just think they're a middle-of-the-pack team right now that has the potential and has had the potential to be in the top 5 or so, but every time they start to make up a little bit of ground, they lose a game and they lose, it's like one step forward, one step back for them.
Yeah, I think that 9, 10, and 11 is just kind of their group.
Yeah, pretty much at this point, yeah.
And the only advantage I would say that TCU has over Baylor is that their fan base is not completely given up on TCU and they still have faith. Baylor's problem is that team and that coaching staff is not going to get any real warmth or reception from the fans to give them a boost down the stretch. Like they're going to play Utah this weekend. That's a really tough team. That it's a really bad matchup for them defensively. That you would really like to see a fan base that's engaged and out there this week, and that's probably not going to happen. I mean, I can't say no for sure, but the trend is that people aren't going to show up for that, and they're not going to have any kind of real home field advantage.
Yeah, I mean, they've got very little mojo to speak of, but they're still better than some of the teams, and so they've got that going for them, and TCU's kind of in a similar boat. But here's what TCU has remaining. Thank God they got bowl eligible at BYU, at Houston, and then Cincinnati at home. So they could very well go 0-3. They're good enough to win all three of those games, but that's TCU. They'll go like 2-1 or 1-2, and they'll end up around 500, and that's just kind of who they are these last couple of years. On to the next grouping of 4. We've got Iowa State. Now, this is the team that jumped back up because of their win this past weekend over TCU, a game that looked like it was going to perhaps be their 5th loss in a row. I still have my reservations about Iowa State, but when you look at it, it's like, hey, you beat TCU, so you can't stay behind them. I definitely think you've got more mojo right now than Baylor. You beat Kansas State earlier this year, and I'm not going to drop you any lower than that. So they deserve to slide immensely when they lost 4 consecutive games. But now you've won another game, and so you're back. And I think we're kind of finding the real territory for them is just outside of the top 5-ish kind of area, along with these other teams. Arizona up a spot as well after last weekend as Arizona gets that big win over Kansas. Really critical for Brent Brennan and company to make a bowl game, and they did that with that 6th win last weekend, so they go up a spot. Houston now 8-2 after their win in Orlando. They got the space race victory. They're the kings of space, according to Willie Fritz, although I don't think he quite said that, but there was a lot of back and forth on exactly the space game and what it meant, and like UCF fans like very particular about it. But the game with the space theme, and I mean particular as far as, well, Houston's not technically the space, and what we're talking about when we say it, like it gets very into the details of it. But for the game with the 2 programs that have the most space to talk about, Houston gets the win and gives UCF its first ever loss in their home space game. So Willie Fritz and the Cougs up a spot, and that number 5 Cincinnati did not play last week, but the Cougs are 8-2.
Look,
they're 8-2.
I'll just tell people who want to get in the weeds about the space game to it, of like, what airports do you fly in if you wanted to go visit NASA? Orlando and Houston.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Garrett knows what I'm talking about. Like they're more like, there's like a detailed explanation for why it's not exactly a great comparison, right?
Yeah, it gets. I think there's too much into that. I think that it's very convoluted of how it gets the nonsense behind it.
Yeah,
UCF definitely takes it personal.
Yeah,
Makai Muse had something to say about it though after that game.
Who did?
Makai
Makai Muse popped off on it. Yeah, Willie Fritz was claiming we own space basically, and all of that. So I know what UCF is getting at. Those like 75% of NASA's like UCF grads or whatever it is, and I'm embellishing a little bit, not much though, I don't think. So there you go. Cincinnati with no game last week, they stay pat at number 5 there. So let's roll into the top 4. And remember, Cincinnati as well coming off a bludgeoning at the hands of Utah.
Yeah.
By 31 points last we saw them. So we'll see what they look like as they take on Arizona this weekend. Now to the top 4, and not a lot changed here. I mean, Arizona State stays put. I think with the loss of Levin and Tyson, I could ding them a bit in the mojo, but the last time we saw them, they went to Ames and got a big win to or to prevent from going on a little bit of a skid there. And, dude, they've lost to Utah, they've lost to Houston, and they lost in Starkville in week number 2. And they're still winning games despite the fact that they've been really banged up with their top 2 players. That defense is still really, really good. And offensively, they still have some oomph to them. So nice performance by Jeff Sims against Iowa State there a couple weeks ago. We'll see what he has in the can this week against West Virginia at home. But Arizona State stays put, as does Utah, who I think one thing we didn't talk about in the CFP rankings was where they were. I saw some pushback on how high they are because of who they have or have not beaten. I think with Utah, the key thing is they lost to Tech and BYU. Like, that's who they've lost to, and everybody else they've crushed. So there is a little bit of a debate on how high Utah was, but last time we saw them out there, they were beating the mess out of Cincinnati. So they've had a break, and now they are traveling to Waco, and I think you feel good about their chances there. And then number 1 and number 2 is decided last weekend in Lubbock, Texas. These were the top 2 teams and have been really for the last few weeks. And it was very clear when all was said and done. Texas Tech with the 3-score win. They jumped back up after that Arizona State loss dinged them and allowed BYU, who was undefeated, to jump over them. Well, now they played. Tech got the win. It explains itself. So BYU, I don't drop more than a spot. I still think they're a really good team. I think they went to Lubbock against a really good team and got overwhelmed, but they beat Utah, and I would take them over everybody else on this list right now as well. So they've still got some big games coming up themselves, like Cincinnati's right around the corner for BYU. They've got TCU this weekend. So those next 2 weeks, if they can get through that, they got UCF at the end. So real shot for them to go 11-1. And for that reason, I've got them at 2, and then Tech, no explanation needed.